Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Lundholm-Eads, and I'm the Director of Services and Planning for the Archdiocese. That's Services and Planning for the Leadership Roundtable. I used to work for an archdiocese. And welcome to the lunch here. Our plan today is we'll be saying grace in just a moment, and then during dessert, then we'll leave you alone. During dessert, Bob Ottenhoff is going to lead us, and I'll introduce him later. But Katie McKenna, where are you? You're here somewhere. Katie is going to lead us in prayer. Katie is is on the staff of the National Leadership Roundtable, and she's also the leader of the Esteem group, the Esteem program nationally. So, a very talented young lady. She's new to the staff. She asked me. She said I should introduce her the way her mother would introduce her, but Katie, I won't do that. Katie, would you like to come up and lead us in prayer?
My mother would say that I was very pretty, is what I had said. Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for the opportunity to serve the church. We give thanks for the opportunity to enter into deeper relationships with one another in service to the common good. Thank you for the gifts and talents in this room and the chance to use them for all that you intend. We give thanks for the meal we are about to receive and for those who prepared it. Help us to be mindful of all who are hungry and in need in our country and throughout the world. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, guests, we'd like to move on to the next part of the program, which is I want to introduce you to Bob Ottenhoff. Bob is the ex-president and CEO of Guidestar, and he's been there around about 10 years with Guidestar. And as this president and CEO, he's responsible for the execution of the Guidestar mission and for fundraising to support the mission, for developing a sustainable model for the Guidestar mission. And he's also the liaison to the board of directors. He's involved in the governance of the organisation. Bob has 25 years of management experience in public broadcasting and high-tech companies, including 9 years as the Chief Operating Officer of the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS. He currently serves on a number of non-profit boards of Vision TV, Grameen Foundation USA, Link TV, and Right On Sports. He previously served on the board of the AEFRC Trust for Philanthropy and the E-Philanthropy Foundation. Bob holds a bachelor's degree from Calvin College and a master's degree in planning from Rutgers University. He's a sought-after writer and speaker on non-profit and philanthropic issues, and he's been frequently quoted on television, radio, and leading publications such as the New York Times, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Ottenhoff.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you so much for inviting me here today. Let me just start off by saying how much I admire your work and what an honor it is to be able to talk with all of you today, and wish you well in the important work that you're doing for our society. I want to just also say hi to Carrie. She and I have had a long-distance email, phone call relationship for the last year or two, but first time I've had a chance to meet you, so thank you so much for inviting me. I'm also glad to be here in this building. I had a son who just graduated a few weeks ago with his MBA from Georgetown, and so I appreciate both the quality education he received here and also the cost of the quality of the education he received. So we'll be remembering the MBA program here for a long time in the Ottenhoff household. So I'm going to talk to you today about the nonprofit world. I've I've never run a faith-based organization, so you're all the experts on that. But I'm hoping that my sharing of information about the nonprofit sector can be of benefit to you, and you can apply it to your own situation. So let me see if I can get this technology to work. First, just a couple of slides about Guidestar. Guidestar's mission is to revolutionize philanthropy with information. We believe that with more information, donors can make better and more confident decisions and thereby increase their charitable giving. And also, armed with better information, nonprofit organizations can increase their performance, both their efficiency and their effectiveness, and thereby increase their impact. So we have about 10 million users this year that will come to the Guidestar site, and we collect information from a variety of sources. First, we take every filing that the nonprofit organizations must file with the IRS. 990 is the most obvious example, but there are other ones as well. Increasingly, we're finding that the 990 is an okay document, but donors are asking for more. And so we now have something called the Guidestar Exchange, which is a way for a nonprofit to supply us with information. We'll talk some more about why donors want this, but this is a free way for a nonprofit to provide us with information about their board, about their management team, about their capabilities, about their mission, about their impact. And we have about 50,000 organizations that have voluntarily given us this information, including about, I'd say, somewhere around 5,000 to 7,000 faith-based organizations. We also collect information from our partners like community foundations and private foundations that do their own vetting of nonprofits. Increasingly, we're experimenting with things like user and evaluations. So, for example, we work with a San Francisco-based organization that is now asking for the feedback of donors and program recipients and volunteers to various organizations. To give us one more data point, we acquired another organization called Philanthropedia last year, which collects information from program officers at foundations and content experts to give us feedback on the performance of organizations. And finally, we're starting to work with other organizations that provide accounting seals. So all that gets mixed into our database and then is made available to our users. As I mentioned, we have about 10 million users. We also supply data to about 75 other sites. So if you go to a commercial donor advised fund, they're most likely using Guidestar data. If you go to some of the giving portals like Network for Good and Just Give, they're using Guidestar data. Causes on Facebook. So we're trying to become the underlying data source to the nonprofit sector. People use us in two ways. About 98% of our users use us at no charge. And Jim and I were talking over lunch. We've built a model of sustainability. About 2% of our users want to dig really deep into the data or use some of our sophisticated tools. They pay a fee, and that's now generating most of our operating revenue. So I'm going to talk about three big issues today that I think are confronting the nonprofit sector: legitimacy and trust, effectiveness and efficiency, and then the economics of where we are and where we think we're going in the nonprofit sector. The era of assumed virtue is over for nonprofit organizations. Now, I say this to non-faith-based organizations, so I'm not just picking on you today, and I'm not saying you're necessarily doing something wrong, but we live in an era today where we've got increased skepticism about nonprofit organizations and increased skepticism about institutions in general. So there's kind of three kind of big parts to this, this new era we're in. There's greater demand for transparency and accountability. Think about it. We're now asking our schools to prove that our teachers are actually teaching our kids, right? We want to know more about how our government spends our money. So there's a big movement afoot for more transparency around money. We're asking our religious institutions to be more transparent, more accountable. We're in an era now where people expect more from our institutions, and they're more skeptical of all of our institutions. Along with that is a greater personal engagement in philanthropy. We hear from so many donors who come to us and say, I'm not going to give you money anymore because you're nice people doing nice work. I'm looking for someone who can really make a difference. And so I'm going to give my money to organizations who can show to me that they're actually making a difference. Now this has some, has some downsides to it as well, this personal engagement. We're seeing increased emphasis on restricted gifts. We're seeing more interest in organizations that can be very tangible in describing what you get. Think about the growth of organizations like Kiva or Heifer International, where you can see someone say, for my $50, I'm going to buy a cow for this woman in Africa. And I think that's part of this movement we're seeing about more engagement. People want to be involved, they want to do the research, but they want to know, do they have a good partner for their donor dollars? And finally, greater data on which to base decisions. And this shouldn't be surprising. I know we're many business people in the room here today. You use data all the time. You wouldn't think about making a major decision without having the data to back up your decision. We wouldn't think about buying a car or a refrigerator without first referring to Consumer Reports or using Zagat's before we go to a restaurant. So that same kind of need for data is also driving a lot of the decisions today in the nonprofit sector and how we make our giving decisions. Along with this new era of assumed virtue being over is just the incredible growth of the nonprofit sector and how confusing that is, I think, to the average donor. This also should remind you that your favorite nonprofit organization is not the center of the universe. There's other choices that donors have today, and donors have lots of choices to make, and again, going back to the last slide, based on their expectations. We've seen an amazing growth in the nonprofit sector. It's growing at about 60,000 new nonprofits a year. Even during the Great Recession starting in 2008, we've seen very little slowdown in the number of new nonprofits. I'm often asked, do we have too many nonprofits? And my answer always is, well, who's to say? You know, like, we don't want a bureaucrat or some other czar to be telling us, no, you can't. And I kind of like it in a way because it does reflect the can-do attitude of Americans and the passion that we have both for making a difference in our society, but also the passion for getting things done. But I think what it does do is begin not only confuse the general public, but it does put more pressure on donors to make sure that they're supporting organizations that are worthy of support. And finally, I'll just say one last thing about that big drop in 2011. No, these aren't necessarily organizations that went out of business. The IRS got a lot of pressure from Congress to try to begin to oversee, I won't say regulate, oversee the nonprofit sector. And so it sent out, it really had no idea about how many nonprofits there were. And so, because it's so easy to start one. So they sent out a postcard registration. And by the end of if you got 3 postcards and didn't answer, you lost your charitable status. So that lost about 300,000 organizations. But this is confusing. We did a webinar not too long ago for producers and editors of ESPN. They said so many of our stories now involve nonprofits. The NFL is a nonprofit. Bowls are nonprofits. Celebrity athletes are creating nonprofits. You know, like, what's all this about? So I'll leave it with just the thought that your nonprofit, the ones you care about the most, are working in an environment where there's lots of competition and there's lots of confusion. And so part of what you need to be able to explain to your donors is why are you unique and distinctive, and why are you deserving of support. Second point I want to talk a little bit about is the new normal. And as business people, you know this story better than I do. First, let's take a look at the sources of revenue. And this is always a surprise for many people. Private contributions, as important as they are only 14% of all the money going to support nonprofit organizations. So much of it comes through government grants, fees for services, and then fees for goods. So this last one here would be a theater that sells tickets. So earned revenue is a big part of the sector, and fees for services are important. But if we focus for just a minute on philanthropic giving, we've got an amazing 40-year story. Year after year, we saw steady increases in charitable giving, without exception until we got to 2008, where we saw for the first time a drop. This gives a little more granularity to that. We hit a peak for the sector of about $315 billion in 2007. Saw a drop in 2008, a further drop in 2009. We saw a 2% increase in 2010. Just last week, Giving USA came out with its statistics for 2011, and we were basically flat for 2011. And the Foundation Center just came out with a report saying that foundation giving in 2011 was also pretty flat. So think about the numbers here. We've lost about, roughly $30 billion in the charitable sector since 2007. If we grow at 2% a year like we did from 2009 to 2010, it would take us somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 years to get back to where we were in 2007. So this is part of this new normal we have to begin to think about in the charitable sector. I call this, this chart looks a lot like the value of my home, right? In Virginia, and maybe a lot like my 401k. So that's also part of the new normal I'm thinking about these days, and so are lots of other people. We've been doing surveys right along to find out what's happening out there in the field. This is our last survey was about 6 months or so ago. We saw that 41% of charitable organizations saw an increase in 2011. However, 65% saw an increase in demand. And here's this third bullet is the one I want to focus your attention on. 8% of all charities represented in the survey are in danger of closing. And by the way, this is a survey we've been seeing now for the last few years, certainly since 2009, that continuously comes up. And some of the things we look for are contributions, low cash reserves, limited number of funders, and flat or declining non-contribution revenues, some of those other items I was talking about. 3 big indicators we always look for as predictors of charitable giving: the stock market, particularly at the end of the year when it comes capital gains time, is really important. Many nonprofits get upwards of 40% or more of all of their giving in the last few weeks of December. Unemployment rate makes sense, right? If you're unemployed, you're going to be giving less to charitable causes. And this mysterious but really important factor, consumer confidence. How do you feel about yourself, about your community, about your prospects for the future? And I've added a fourth in the last year or so, is the sorry condition of state and local and, say, federal government budgets. There's uncertainty, there's reductions. There's so many governments that are now either reducing contracts or not paying contracts or paying slow. This has had a huge impact, particularly in social service organizations. So I think we need to be thinking about this new normal as part of our thoughts about the nonprofit sector. And then finally, I want to talk some more about this emphasis now on impact, effectiveness and impact. Our own view about this is that people come with a variety of values and expectations. They want to choose their own criteria, and they are increasingly interested in nonprofit capabilities and results. We've been doing a lot of research about what kind of data do donors want before they make a decision. And this past year, we interviewed about 5,000 high net worth individuals, about 1,000 or two advisors, and then also several thousand program officers at large foundations. Across the board, 5 things were seen to be the most important of all. Financials, which is not surprising, and that's traditionally where we've always gone. But more than that, effectiveness, legitimacy, this whole issue I was talking about earlier about do they trust you? Do they trust the fact that you're a nonprofit organization and a good one? And then something about the cause and some basic information. These are the 5 essentials that your website needs to have. These are the 5 essentials that your annual reports need to have if you're going to develop that trust from your donors. As a result of this research, we've now reorganized our reports to donors and the way we display information. We have something called our public report page. We've added some information that shows that yes, this is a legitimate organization. Yes, it's been authorized by the IRS to operate. And then along with that, we've begun to really emphasize mission. What's the mission of this organization? Its impact statement. Is it measuring what it does? I'm personally on a mission to end the overhead ratio as the first question that's asked about a nonprofit organization. I think the overhead ratio is terribly misleading and has been really harmful to a lot of nonprofit organizations. Yes, efficiency is important. Yes, how you allocate your resources are important, but I want to know, first of all, what's the mission of this organization and how are you doing? What's your impact? What difference are you making in your community? And if you cost a little bit more than another organization, but you're doing so much more good, well, that's really what matters to me. And so as part of that effort, we've joined up with the Better Business Bureau and the independent sector to start something called Charting Impact. And we're on a movement to try to make this the key questions that a donor asks of a nonprofit organization. They're simple, but they're really profound. And we would urge you to use this with your management team, spend some time in a board meeting asking these 5 questions, and then maybe begin to share them with your stakeholders. So you can ask your stakeholders, hey, here's what we said about our organization. Do you agree? Do you agree that we're really making a difference? So what is your organization aiming to accomplish? And it's surprising how many nonprofit managers have trouble giving that 2-minute elevator speech. What are your strategies for making this happen? How are you going to do what you said you were going to do? Capabilities of huge interest today to donors. And then finally, how do you know that you're making progress? How are you measuring your progress so that I know my money is being well spent? We're at a point now where I think this is an exciting moment for the nonprofit sector. It may not sound that way from what I've said so far. We know that demand for services is likely to increase. We know that revenues are not likely to come back to where they were in the 2007 level for some period of time. And so this gives us an opportunity, I think, to begin to think about how we can provide our services in new and exciting ways. And I really started to think about this past summer. My son, who just graduated last week, and I should say, also got a job, which also made me feel very good. Interned this past summer at eBay in San Jose. And he called me and said, what do you think about driving back with me from California? My first thought was, oh, that's a terrible idea. I can't, even stand the 5-hour plane ride out to San Francisco. But, this may not happen again, that my son invites me to do this. And we both have a love of geography and history and food. And so we took this 5-day trek across the United States. Along the way, I read 4 newspapers every day, but never touched a newspaper. I read books, but never touched a book. We listened to music constantly, but never turned on the radio. We used sources like TripAdvisor and Yelp to pick the best steak in Oklahoma City and the best breakfast burrito in Albuquerque. All along, we were using industries that had been changed, that over the last 10 years have been disaggregated, disintermediated by new technologies, by new ways of delivering services. And I got back and I thought, this is something that hasn't happened yet in the nonprofit sector. Our time is still coming. We have not yet embraced the new technologies or embraced new ways of doing services. So many of our organizations are based today on business models that were created in the 1950s and the 1960s when we expected the revenue to go up, 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 and we expected our donors to be totally loyal to us, and we expected our organization to be the center of the universe. Those don't happen anymore. And so I think we've got an opportunity here to begin thinking about how we want to restructure our organizations, how we want to change the way we deliver services, how our business models need to change. And so I'll leave you with that thought. How can we do our work in different ways and continue to provide great service to our donors and increase our charitable giving? So thank you very much. Well, I've heard this is a really lively group of people of strong opinions, and so I hope we have some time for some questions, and please challenge what I've had to say, or if you have observations, I'd love to hear those as well. Who wants to get us started? Were you surprised? Yeah, yes, sir.
Churches do not have to file 994.
Right.
Is that a good idea or?
That's a bad idea. So the question was, churches don't have to file 990s. A good idea or a bad idea? It's a bad idea because in today's world, for the reasons I stated, donors are expecting you to be transparent and accountable, and they want to know how you're spending their hard-earned dollars. Many faith-based organizations are beginning to realize this. So there are many social service organizations or others who rely on individual giving that are now voluntarily starting to file on Guidestar. They don't necessarily need to file a 990. There are some that do, but certainly file with Guidestar. And it's a recognition of this is what it now takes to do business, to develop that strength, that relationship with the donating public. Yes, sir.
Bob, thank you first. That was great. Do you have any follow-on collateral that we might be able to use with our boards, kind of the board-in-a-box kit or something that helps
Sure.
lead us through some of those
Happy to
issues or
share
questions?
this report with you, and then we can also put you in touch with some of the things that are on our website. Our website has lots of information that's available to boards. Yes, sir.
I think many of us involved with nonprofit organizations struggle with how do you support the institution long term, because revenue is obviously an important part of the equation. Right. As I think about Guidestar's model, what else are you doing to monetize the data that you've aggregated and the services that you hope to
Right.
deliver so that you can grow further and
Sure.
offer a wider range of services to nonprofits and others.
So we were started with about $25 million in foundation support from a consortium of foundations that came together, recognizing the need for data. And we burned through that money pretty quickly. And the foundations said, we're not giving you any more money until you come up with a model of sustainability. And so we had to go from free to fee. And we learned through doing a lot of research that people were using us for not only for individual donations, but for business purposes. And a lot of our users were accountants, lawyers, financial institutions who needed us in order to perform our service. So that's when we came up with our model of charging for digging really deep into the data and using our sophisticated tools. And that's now about, it'll be somewhere between 90 to 100% of all of our revenues this year. It changed the culture of our organization. I believe that when everything's free, good enough turns out to be good enough. And when a customer is giving you some of their hard-earned money and expecting something in return, it demanded that we think through our technology, think through the quality of our data, think through our customer service, do all kinds of things to be able to earn that fee. So it really, I think, culturally was very good for us. I believe that sustainability is going to be one of the key issues for the nonprofit sector in the years ahead. And I've become quite firm about this in my own beliefs, is that if we believe strongly in the mission of our organization, and we should, and we believe that the services we offer are important, are valuable, are really making a contribution to society, we have an obligation to be thinking through how can we sustain this service. And I don't think it's good enough today to say, somehow we'll muddle through. Somehow we'll figure it out and we'll come up with enough money to save the day. But it also leads to, I think, a more important issue now is the capabilities and capacities of organizations. Donors today want to know, are you really making a difference? And that means I think we have an opportunity as donors to try to drive more money to high-performing organizations. Because 1.6 million organizations spread out over the kind of revenue growth we're going to see in the sector just isn't going to work. If we're not careful, we could end up sustaining mediocrity rather than really making a difference. So I think one of the trends you're going to see, and we're trying to be part of this, is how do we drive more money to the high performers who are actually making a difference and have the ability to scale and to be sustainable.
I was struck
Yes.
by your trip across the country and how you talked about recognizing how technology and what's happening in society have changed. And you said the nonprofit sector's time is yet to come in that area. And given that it's a room full of church leaders here,
Yeah.
what would you say from where you sit would be either something we ought to pay attention to or a great opportunity that you see that we might be missing?
Sure. Well, it seems to be in the DNA of most nonprofit leaders to say, I need to do all of this myself. And business leaders a long time ago said, wait a minute, what are we really good at? Maybe we're not so good at IT. Maybe we're as good at IT as we thought we were. So I think that's the first step, is focusing on what are the core competencies of our nonprofit organization. What are the services we need to have within our organization versus the ones that we can partner with somebody else that can do it much better than we can. I think the second thing, and this is a hard thing for boards to deal with, we're still, I think, driven by thinking that solutions lie in organizations rather than looking at what needs to get done and then coming up with the right organizational structure. So we've got lots of duplication of nonprofits. We've got many nonprofits who serve just a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole solution. And so there's a lot of, I think, overlap, and that could be eliminated if we focused on the problem rather than focused on sustaining our organizations. There's a lot of talk right now in the nonprofit sector about mergers and acquisitions, but it's all talk. There's very little that's happening. And it's because it's hard to do in the nonprofit sector. But it's something, another area for us to be thinking about. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Charles Kelly. I do organization development consulting with nonprofits.
Okay. Hi.
My question, I want to follow up on your comments about sustainability, long-term sustainability, and especially your comment about the tyranny of the overhead ratio.
Yeah.
Because I think that not only do donors have a problem getting beyond that, but also nonprofit leaders have a problem getting beyond that.
Absolutely.
And you can make very rational arguments that, if you have low overhead, you're just going to be a stagnant organization that's just going to die. You're not going to grow, and you're not going to be responsive in the future. You can make that argument till you're blue in the face. Everybody's going to nod their head and agree with you, but they still want to say, but I want all my money going to direct services. So what are your strategies for getting beyond that?
It's like saying, I'm only going to fly airlines that spend the least amount on maintenance, right?
But people agree with you, but then they still insist.
Yeah, I mean, so I think nonprofits have to do a much better job of telling their story and saying, look, we're investing in people, in technology, in our infrastructure because we can provide better service that way. And so I would start with the end result. Here's what we've done, and here's the difference we've made. And then you can back up to say, here's what it takes for us to be able to deliver those services. But it's true, nonprofits have painted themselves into a corner. They say, none of your money will go to overhead. And I say, well, how do you do that? I mean, like, are you all volunteers and you don't pay electric bills? I mean, how is that possible? So, looks like we're out of time. We have time for one more. Yes? Back here. Okay. All right, we've got two questions.
Okay, hey, Bob,
Nice
how are you? Good to see you
Hey, hi,
again.
how you doing?
First off, the impact one that you did is interesting because we've been talking obviously a lot about collaboration, and in many ways you're there. In fact, just from a corporate side, I'm with Arthur J. Gallagher, and we use Salesforce as our backbone of our sales engine for research. And one of the things I noticed, and again, we've got thousands of employees all over the world, but I lead the nonprofit, and is the data. And so we use data.com for our tool that we go to, but I said, why can't we bring Guidestar in as our data piece? So we're actually forging a partnership with Guidestar, where Salesforce, has this incredible Silicon Valley organization with a huge nonprofit bent, by the way, is using Guidestar. My question for you is, something happened the other day, and I noticed on CNN, Charity Navigator CEO was on, and I wanted you on. Tell me a little bit about the difference between your two organizations.
Sure. I don't know how this happened, but I've been on Anderson Cooper twice within the last 10 days. But the difference between us and CNN is, or Charity Navigator, I know that difference too. Charity Navigator rates about 5,000 organizations. It started by only rating their overhead ratio. It's now expanded that to be about to include something about transparency and accountability. But then they give that organization a star rating. So they say, this is a good organization, that's a bad organization. Our own, we think that's hard to do, or maybe impossible to do, for the reason I stated in my presentation. People come with different values, different priorities. So overhead ratio may be important to one, but I may be more interested in longevity or reserves or lots of other factors. So there are lots of priorities and values that come to the giving experience, and we think that needs to be factored into judging whether this is a good organization or not. But I will say this about Charity Navigator. They're scratching an itch, and the itch that the public has is they want more data to help them make decisions, because people want to do the right thing, and there's just enough skepticism, just enough concern that they're looking for more data. And so this is where some of them are going. And then the final question over here. Sir.
We can do it in the plenary session, that's fine.
Okay. So that's it? Okay.
Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate your contribution to our understanding of the world, from a world where mediocrity can get in the way of our business. We understand the height of quality that you've brought to the non-profit world. Thank you very much for what your contribution today.